Why is the issue of tax havens important?
It's important because tax havens are not only undermining our tax regimes and undermining respect for the rule of law, they're also undercutting democracy. We find ourselves in Britain, for example, held hostage to the interests of bankers and others within the City of London who are constantly telling us, very publicly on radio, if you try to tax us, we're out of here. We're going to move to Luxembourg. We're going to move to Switzerland or Ireland or whatever. Give us the tax breaks we require. This is a process called tax competition, which is degrading not just our tax system, but also our democracy. We no longer have the power to impose the tax systems we want to impose.
Won't the banks and high wealth earners just take their business elsewhere if they can't use tax havens in the UK?
Some will, no doubt, but in the past it's always been shown to be an absolutely hollow threat. I mean, no serious organisation, bank or whatever, would not be present in London. But there's something more insidious at place here. There's the idea, and politicians are very fond of this stupid idea, that tax competition is a good thing. We know that competition helps at the micro level of firms to improve productivity, improve the quality of goods and services, and to keep prices down. Somehow our stupid and benighted politicians have adopted the idea that tax competition between countries is a good thing. It has no role whatsoever in economic theory. It's a political construct. It's a game of beggaring our neighbour, that is beggaring other nation states by poaching their tax revenues. And I regret to say that Britain is a lead player in this process. I think one of the myths we have to overcome is that by attracting all this money into Britain, into the City of London, we're actually increasing investment in the British economy. We are not. By and large, these people have not come to Britain to create new companies. They come to Britain to, they put their money into commercial real estate, creating real estate bubbles, into the housing market, creating housing market bubbles, crowding out other people because they're forcing house price inflation. They put their money into the equity markets, again creating bubbles there. But these are not entrepreneurs, they're not creating additional jobs, and where they do take over, I mean, a lot of they make investments through mergers and acquisitions, they're actually taking over existing businesses, cutting employment in many cases, and shifting the taxes offshore. Britain would be a damn sight better off without that kind of person.
Okay, so John, you say that tax havens cause chaos and poverty. Those are quite strong words. Can you justify those?
On the poverty side, we have, over the last 30 years, we've seen a massive shift of the tax burden away from people who can afford it, and powerful corporations, onto working people, onto ordinary people, and above all onto the poor people. Because what's happening is, because governments are no longer taxing the capital and businesses, we're shifting the tax onto indirect tax forms like VAT. Here in Britain, we've just seen a hike in VAT, 2.5%. Everyone has to pay for it, which means that our tax systems are becoming either less progressive, which they used to be, or in some cases actually regressive, transferring wealth from the poor people to the rich people. I think most people understand that this is appalling. It is certainly contributing to poverty. It's a problem here in Europe, a problem here in the United Kingdom. It's a disaster in developing countries, and that's why we must tackle it.
Okay, could you explain how tax havens undermine the British tax system?
Tax havens are hardwired into our economy. There are many ways in which actually we have become both a perpetrator of tax havenery and also a victim of tax havenery. Britain has led the field in this area. Also, I regret to say that Britain continues to protect tax haven interests. We publicly talk about the need to close them down, but behind closed doors, Britain blocks international attempts to achieve that. How does it affect us? Well, first of all, Britain has become a victim of avoidance and evasion on an incredible scale. The British tax gap is estimated at £120 billion a year. More than sufficient to cover the deficit, more than sufficient to protect and improve our public services if there was the government will to do this. But instead we're suffering from tax increases for poorer people, public service cuts for poorer people, but tax breaks for richer people and powerful corporations. So Britain is both a victim and a perpetrator of tax havenery, and Britain has more in its power to overcome the tax haven problem than any other country, but chooses to not take action.
Can you give some examples of organisations that are using tax havens and why it costs the taxpayer money?
The tax systems have now become so unfit for purpose, so unfit, in other words, to encourage entrepreneurialism and so on, that we're actually subsidising companies to buy up existing companies, shift their intellectual property rights, their brand names and so on, offshore to Switzerland. Boots is a classic example. It's a quintessentially British company with virtually no trading activity or procurement outside Britain, now based in Switzerland, shifting their profits to Britain because of a failure to create the appropriate framework for taxing companies like this. Boots is just one example amongst many, but what's particularly egregious is that actually we're subsidising private equity businesses to do this and treating these people as, in some respects, entrepreneurial heroes. They wouldn't be able to know how to start a business of their own from scratch in any circumstances. They're not. Actually, they're actually more predatory in their activities, and their idea of innovation is not so much to bring forward new products or new services, but to create aggressive tax avoidance structures which undermine our tax system.
We're actually giving them a double subsidy in some ways, in like examples like Boots, as you mentioned, because interest payments on debt can be written off against tax.
Yeah.
And of course, the Boots buyout was engineered through a massive leveraged debt.
That's right. It's a madness, and it's leading to a situation where, far from having any equity risk capital employed, by and large they're leveraging as much as they possibly can so that we, the public, are subsidising the risk of their activities. I mean, it's a crazy system. This isn't capitalism. This is some kind of perverted market socialism where we are subsidising the rich to undertake what they regard as entrepreneurial activity. I mean, completely crazy perversion.
Would there be any detrimental effects to removing the tax havens?
None that I'm aware of. None whatsoever. I can only see upside. The quicker it's done, the better.
What do you think of the government's approach to tackling tax avoidance and tax evasion?
They have set up a commission to look into the idea of bringing a general anti-avoidance principle into British law. I think that would be a very good move. I don't want a general anti-avoidance rule because rules are played around with by the lawyers. We want a principle. We want a principle which sets to the tax evasion and tax avoidance industry, by which I mean the lawyers and the accountants and the bankers that engage in helping their clients to evade and avoid tax, that this is just not acceptable. We must simply overturn Britain's deeply rooted culture of tax avoidance. On the other hand, they've announced to great fanfare they're going to put another £900 million towards funding anti-evasion activities. Frankly, that's pitiful. They have cut much, much more from the Revenue and Customs budget. So 3 times that sum has been cut from the Revenue and Customs budget. We're losing many Revenue and Customs staff. Our Revenue and Customs is not fit for the purpose for which it's designed. So I think so far the measures they've announced are woefully inadequate.
The government's move. There's also been a very fast-growing and a movement that's gained a lot of media attention, the UK Uncut movement, which has seen, I think, 150 plus protests now around the country. What do you think of that?
Terrific. I mean, first of all, they are very funny, they're witty, they choose just the right targets. People say, well, why aren't they targeting the government? Well, behind the government it is of course big businesses that are pulling the strings and shaping our tax policies. So it's absolutely right to be targeting big business and powerful individuals like Philip Green. So I think what they're doing is very sassy, they're very clever with the media, and I'm very proud to be associated with them. I and my family have been on at some of their events, and what's been interesting for me is to see what a large proportion of the public, that is the public passers by on Oxford Street and elsewhere, have quickly understood the message, understood that the cuts agenda being pushed by the government is a choice rather than a necessity. They have chosen to cut rather than tackle tax avoidance. There is a huge amount of 120 billion of avoidance and evasion which could be cooped in by the government to collect it if they chose to do that. They choose to not do that. So I think linking the two issues, the cuts and the tax avoidance, is very cute. It worked very well. The public understand it. Bring it on.
Okay, thanks for coming, John, and thanks for answering those questions. I look forward to seeing us doing something about tax avoidance in this country.